Imagine ruling a kingdom, commanding armies, and navigating political intrigue, all while managing the challenges of menstruation in an age before modern hygiene. In the medieval courts of Europe, queens were expected to embody grace, authority, and composure at all times. Yet, behind the closed doors of their private chambers, they faced a natural reality that their societies rarely spoke of. Today, we uncover the little-discussed world of how queens in the Middle Ages dealt with their periods, and how it shaped both their personal lives and their political roles. Where possible, this account draws on primary sources and historians' findings: court household accounts, medical treatises like the Trotula, archival correspondence, and archaeological textile evidence. We also reference documented practices in laundering, menstrual garment construction, and herbal remedies noted in period herbals from the Salerno school. The Middle Ages, spanning roughly from the 5th to the late 15th century, was a period of profound social stratification, religious influence, and limited medical understanding. Royal courts were not only centers of power, but also places where image and symbolism were everything. A queen's physical appearance, public behavior, and perceived purity were matters of state interest. Yet, like all women, queens menstruated. This fact sat uncomfortably within medieval concepts of the body. Influenced by ancient medical theory, particularly the works of Hippocrates and Galen, medieval physicians believed in the balance of 4 bodily humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Menstruation was seen as the body's way of expelling excess blood, a natural but also potentially dangerous process. In a queen whose body was linked to dynastic stability and fertility, this monthly event was both a private matter and, indirectly, a public concern. Royal households were vast operations, with dozens, sometimes hundreds, of attendants. Among these were ladies-in-waiting and chambermaids whose duties extended to the most intimate aspects of the queen's life. Privacy, by modern standards, was minimal. This meant that menstruation was never a wholly solitary matter for a queen. It was managed within the framework of court protocol. One of the first surprises for modern audiences is that medieval queens, despite their wealth, did not have access to vastly superior menstrual care compared to ordinary women. While their resources allowed for better quality materials, the basic principles of menstrual management were the same across social classes. Cloth pads, rags, and in some cases simple undergarment modifications were used to absorb menstrual blood. These items had to be washed and reused, meaning that the process was labor-intensive and dependent on a network of trusted female attendants. Furthermore, menstrual cycles could affect the scheduling of public appearances. Certain religious observances, including the reception of Holy Communion, were often avoided by menstruating women due to prevailing ideas of ritual impurity. Although church doctrine on the matter varied over time and place, the perception that a menstruating woman was temporarily unclean influenced both the queen's spiritual life and her public visibility. The political implications of menstruation for a medieval queen were subtle but significant. In a world where a queen's primary duty was often to produce heirs, any irregularity in her menstrual cycle could provoke speculation about her fertility. If she failed to conceive, courtiers and foreign ambassadors might attribute it to a disorder of the womb, sometimes described in terms directly linked to menstruation. For example, chronic menstrual pain or prolonged bleeding could be interpreted as a sign of imbalance in the humors, possibly making conception difficult. This could fuel political gossip, weaken a queen's position at court, and even be used against her in diplomatic negotiations. Marriage treaties were fragile arrangements. The perceived health of a royal bride was a matter of strategic importance. Medical treatment for menstrual issues was rudimentary and often intertwined with superstition. Physicians might prescribe herbal remedies such as mugwort or pennyroyal to regulate cycles, plants mentioned in contemporary herbals from Salerno and other centers of learning. These plants were believed to stimulate menstrual flow, though they could also be dangerous in high doses. In some cases, bloodletting, already considered a standard medical practice, was sometimes prescribed to address perceived imbalances affecting menstruation. The queen's access to such treatments reflected both her privilege and her vulnerability. While she could summon the most learned physicians of the realm, those physicians worked within the limits of medieval medical knowledge. Treatments could be ineffective, unpleasant, or even harmful. Consider the case of Isabella of France, queen consort to Edward II of England in the early 14th century. While records of her personal health are scarce, surviving letters and household accounts, as cited by historians, suggest periods of seclusion that may have coincided with menstruation or other gynecological matters. These absences were carefully managed to avoid public speculation, but even a hint of a queen withdrawing from court life could ignite rumors. Even more telling are medical texts from the period, some dedicated specifically to the care of noblewomen. The Trotula, a medieval compendium on women's medicine, offers detailed advice on managing menstruation. It recommends warm baths infused with herbs, the use of wool or linen pads, and dietary adjustments. Although written for a general audience, such advice would have been accessible to the physicians serving queens, suggesting that elite and common women shared much of the same practical experience. In ceremonial life, the demands of royal protocol meant that menstruation could not simply be ignored. State events, coronations, and religious festivals required the queen's presence. Managing her cycle to coincide with these events would have been a matter of careful planning, possibly involving early forms of menstrual tracking. Given the irregularity of many women's cycles, this was not always possible, leading to moments of quiet improvisation in the midst of highly public occasions. Medieval beliefs about menstruation were complex and often contradictory. On one hand, it was seen as a natural and necessary function essential to women's health. On the other, it was sometimes portrayed as a source of weakness or danger. Some medical writers claimed that menstrual blood was toxic, capable of spoiling crops or causing illness in men. These ideas, though unfounded, persisted in popular belief and may have influenced how queens were treated during their periods. Within the queen's private chambers, attendants were responsible for preparing materials, heating water for washing, and ensuring that soiled cloths were discreetly laundered. The laundering process itself was delicate. Menstrual blood could stain fabrics permanently, and in a court environment where textiles were valuable, preserving the quality of cloth was essential. Linen was the preferred material, as it could be washed and reused. Studies of medieval textile care in noble households indicate that boiling was one method of cleaning, though it may not have been universal. Queens may also have used early forms of menstrual belts, garments designed to hold absorbent material in place. Archaeological evidence and historical descriptions, including museum catalogs of medieval girdles and related artifacts, suggest that these could be made from leather or sturdy cloth, fastened with ties or buckles. While functional, they were far from comfortable by modern standards. Religious and cultural attitudes also played a role in shaping the queen's menstrual experience. In Catholic Europe, menstruating women were sometimes discouraged from entering certain sacred spaces or participating in specific rituals. Although official doctrine varied, personal piety and the influence of confessors and spiritual advisors could lead queens to adopt periods of retreat from public worship. The way a queen managed her menstruation could influence perceptions of her dignity and self-control. A discreet and efficient routine reinforced her image as a composed and capable ruler. Conversely, any public incident, such as visible staining on clothing during a public event, could fuel damaging court gossip with potential political consequences. Menstruation also intersected with the politics of marriage and childbirth. A queen's menstrual history could be used as evidence in matters of annulment or marital dispute. In some cases, testimony about a woman's cycles was gathered to prove or disprove claims of infertility. This placed intensely private information into the realm of legal and political argument. There is also the broader question of empathy and solidarity among women at court. The queen's ladies-in-waiting, many of whom came from noble families themselves, would have shared their own menstrual experiences. This created a private, female space within the court where knowledge and remedies could be exchanged. Such solidarity could be a source of comfort for the queen, though the demands of rank meant that these relationships were shaped by hierarchy as well as shared experience. While much of our detailed evidence comes from Western Europe, it is worth emphasizing that menstrual attitudes and practices varied significantly across the medieval world. In the Byzantine Empire, for example, medical treatises reveal the same humoral framework found in the West, but imperial etiquette imposed additional layers of seclusion. Sources on court ceremony and Byzantine women's roles suggest that empresses often withdrew almost completely from public life during their cycles, delegating ceremonial duties to avoid any hint of impropriety. This withdrawal was framed as a mark of piety and refinement, but it also reinforced the notion of menstrual seclusion as an expected behavior for women of the highest rank. In Islamic Spain, a fusion of Greek, Roman, and Arab medical traditions created an advanced body of gynecological knowledge. Physicians wrote extensively about regulating menstrual cycles, alleviating cramps, and identifying signs of pregnancy. Some of these works were translated into Latin and circulated among Christian physicians, influencing care in European courts. The intellectual cross-pollination between cultures meant that a queen in Castile or Aragon might benefit from remedies first recorded in the medical schools of Córdoba. Farther north, climate shaped practice. Harsh winters and the necessity of heavy woolen clothing posed practical challenges. Thick layers provided warmth but made discreet laundering more complex, leading to increased reliance on multiple absorbent cloths worn at once. This layering not only affected comfort, but also influenced how often a queen could change and clean her menstrual materials, making attendants' discretion and efficiency all the more crucial in maintaining her dignity. Menstrual care in the Middle Ages carried its own health risks. Without knowledge of germs or bacteria, there was little understanding of the importance of thorough cleaning. Reused cloths, if not properly laundered, could cause infections. For queens whose health was a matter of state, such illnesses could have serious implications. Chronic pelvic pain or irregular bleeding might be treated with harsh purgatives, cauterization, or even surgical intervention, all without anesthesia. Childbirth, miscarriage, and menstruation were closely linked in the medieval medical mind. Postpartum bleeding was often conflated with menstruation, and the return of a woman's cycle after childbirth was a key indicator of her reproductive health. Queens, under pressure to produce multiple heirs, were therefore subject to constant scrutiny in this regard. Medieval Christianity read female physiology through Scripture. Church fathers from Tertullian to Isidore cited Genesis to argue that monthly bleeding echoed Eve's first disobedience, a living reminder of human frailty. In sermons and popular homilies, menstruation appeared as a memento mori, proof that flesh decays and souls need salvation. Court confessors advised queens that, during their courses, they should avoid the altar, sacred relics, and even the royal regalia, lest impurity ripple outward and scandalize onlookers. The message was unmistakable. Speak softly about the body and exhibit unshaken spiritual composure. Yet the same tradition exalted the Virgin Mary as a bloodless ideal, perfectly fertile, yet miraculously exempt from menstrual rhythms. Queens were asked to square this impossible circle. They had to produce heirs like a fruitful vine while projecting Marian serenity, untouched by biological messiness. Chroniclers praised rulers who seemed immaculate, and rumors swirled whenever crimson stains appeared on velvet. To manage the contradiction, royal advisors choreographed public devotions to fall outside the queen's cycle, and ladies-in-waiting hustled to hide any trace of bleeding. In the delicate theater of medieval power, a queen's womb was portrayed as both a sacred asset and a point of political vulnerability, celebrated in liturgy, guarded in silence. By the late Middle Ages, the beginnings of more systematic medical record-keeping offer clearer glimpses into royal menstrual care, with household accounts, physicians' notes, and even personal correspondence hinting at how these matters were handled. The Renaissance brought a renewed fascination with anatomy, classical medical texts, and the female body, prompting some court physicians to make more detailed observations. Yet despite these intellectual advances, it would be centuries before menstrual health was understood in modern scientific terms. The knowledge of the period still operated within the framework of humoral theory, religious prescriptions, and a strong emphasis on modesty. For medieval queens, the monthly cycle remained a private and carefully managed challenge, bound by the constraints of available absorbent materials, prevailing beliefs about purity and health, and the rigid expectations of courtly protocol. Every decision, from when to appear in public to how to arrange the laundering of linens, was shaped by a combination of practical necessity and the need to protect the queen's dignity in an environment where physical weakness could be read as political vulnerability. The story of how queens dealt with their periods in the Middle Ages is not simply about hygiene or discomfort. It is a window into the intersection of gender, power, and health in a world that often sought to deny the physical realities of female rulers. Menstruation was a fact of life, yet it had to be managed with utmost discretion in an environment where political fortunes could turn on perceptions of a queen's health and fertility. In examining this aspect of royal life, we are reminded that history is shaped as much by the private experiences of individuals as by the grand events recorded in chronicles. The queens of the Middle Ages navigated their monthly cycles with the resources, knowledge, and support available to them, balancing the demands of their bodies with the demands of their crowns. Their stories remind us that behind the pageantry and power, they were human beings, subject to the same rhythms and challenges that have always been part of women's lives.